It was 11:37 p.m. in Northwood, a small city where the biggest crime used to be teenagers TPING, the mayor's oak tree. Elias, 33, an architect who specialized in historical restorations, was pulling a late shift. He wasn't at the drafting table. He was in his vintage 1978 Ford Bronco, parked under a sputtering yellow sodium lamp outside the old St. Jude's Cathedral. The cathedral spire was his current obsession. A broken weather vane needed replacement, and Elias was sketching elevation points on a pad lit by his phone screen. He'd stopped for a coffee 2 hours ago, but the caffeine had worn off, replaced by the deep, satisfying exhaustion of focused work. He was due home, where his wife, Sophia, a pediatric nurse, was almost certainly asleep, the reading light on her side of the bed casting a warm, comforting glow. Elias was black, tall, and wore his hair in neat locks, usually tied back. Tonight, his clothes were paint-splattered jeans and a heavy work jacket. He wasn't dressed for a dinner party. He was dressed for a construction site. The silence of the late hour was abruptly shattered by the whine of tires turning too fast. 2 police cruisers, dark shapes against the fog-tinged street, bracketed his Bronco. They moved with the surgical precision of a prepared maneuver, not a random patrol stop. Before Elias could process the sudden shift in reality, the roof-mounted spotlights on both vehicles flared to life, hitting him with a dazzling, blinding white light. His first, instinctive reaction was panic, a cold, sickening drop in his gut. Did I park illegally? Did I miss a sign? He slowly lowered his pencil and raised his hands, palms open, keeping them clearly visible on the steering wheel, just as his father had drilled into him 20 years ago. Never let them wonder, Elias. Never make them guess. The driver's side door of the lead cruiser opened, and a figure emerged, silhouetted by the brilliant light. Driver, turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle slowly. Do it now. The voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, was a harsh, impersonal command. Elias fumbled for the keys. His hands were shaking too badly to find the ignition. Slowly, deliberately, he narrated his own actions, a technique he'd learned from a viral video about de-escalation. I'm reaching for the ignition with my right hand now, officer. The engine is now off. He pulled the keys out and placed them on the dashboard. I'm now slowly opening the door and stepping out. My hands are visible at all times. He stood beside his truck, the cold November air hitting his face. He felt exposed, fragile, a single spotlight target against the massive, looming shadows of the cathedral. There were 4 officers now, all tense, all with hands hovering near their sidearms. Keep your hands high, where we can see them. I am, officer, Elias said, his voice strained. Can I ask why I'm being stopped? The lead officer, Sergeant Reynolds, a man with a tired face and a reputation for strict enforcement, stepped closer. He didn't answer the question. He only looked at Elias with an unnerving, focused intensity. You fit the description of suspect involved in the armed robbery of the Union Street Credit Union earlier this evening. Elias blinked. The bank robbery? Sir, I'm an architect. I've been parked here sketching blueprints for the last 2 hours. I have my notes right here. Step away from the vehicle. Reynolds' voice was flat, final. Put your hands behind your back. The word architect meant nothing. Blueprints meant nothing. In that moment, the facts of Elias's life vanished. All that remained was a man in a dark jacket, pulled from a vague description. The cuffs snapped tight, cutting off his narration, his protest, his reality. The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and suffocating silence. Elias was placed in an interrogation room, small, gray, and smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. The metal chair was cold against his back. He sat there for an hour, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a bone-deep, humiliating fear. He hadn't just been accused of a crime. He'd been completely erased. His identity, Elias Vance, the husband, the artist, the man who knew the precise historical mix for mortar, was irrelevant. He was only the black male, approximately 6 feet, wearing a dark jacket, the man they wanted to be guilty. When Detective Maria Rodriguez finally entered, she didn't look malicious, just profoundly weary. She slid a photo across the table. It was a bank surveillance shot, grainy, low resolution, taken in poor lighting. It showed a figure in a dark hooded sweatshirt, their face obscured by shadow and a mask, holding something that might have been a handgun. "We believe this is you, Mr. Vance," Rodriguez said, her voice low. "We found a similar jacket in your vehicle. It matches the witness description of a heavy work coat." "Similar?" "Detective, that image could be anyone from here to Seattle," Elias argued, leaning forward, the handcuffs biting into his wrists. "And the jacket is covered in dried plaster dust. I was working. This is St. Jude's on my shirt." The witness said the suspect fled the scene in a large, dark, older SUV consistent with your vehicle model, she countered, pushing the photo toward him. "And we ran your plates. We know you were only 2 blocks from the bank 30 minutes after the robbery occurred." Elias stared, heart sinking. "The coffee shop. I stopped at the corner coffee shop to fuel up and check my voicemail before heading to the cathedral. That's why my car was nearby." "So, you admit being in the immediate vicinity of the crime, then fled to a secluded parking spot?" "I admit being an adult who drives a truck and drinks coffee." "Detective, I have a verifiable alibi. Call my wife, Sophia Vance. She works at St. Mark's Pediatric. She knows my schedule. Call Father Michael at St. Jude's. He signed off on my late-night access permit. Call my partner. I can give you a dozen people who can vouch for every minute of my night." Rodriguez sighed, running a hand across her forehead. "Mr. Vance, we appreciate your cooperation, but we're going to need to take a mugshot. Standard procedure." The process felt like a violation. Under the harsh flash of the camera, Elias felt his soul shrinking, reduced to a 2-dimensional image that would live forever in a database, associated with the worst kind of crime. The photo was taken. Mugshot before evidence. The phrase echoed in his mind. They wanted the photograph, not the truth. Back in the gray room, Elias closed his eyes. He didn't rail or shout anymore. He just felt the immense, heavy weight of the state pressing down on him. He thought of Sophia. She was probably awake now, looking at his empty side of the bed. Her calls going straight to voicemail because the police had taken his phone. The fear she must be feeling was a physical pain in his chest. Detective Rodriguez returned an hour later, this time holding a stack of papers. "We spoke to your wife, Mr. Vance. She confirmed your general schedule." She paused, then slid a photo across the table, a crisp, high-quality image. It was a different mugshot, not his. This man was also black, also tall, but had a completely different build, a different hairstyle, and different facial structure. He looked older, gaunter. "This is Dennis Duke Jones," Rodriguez said, her voice now completely devoid of expression. "We picked him up in the next county 10 minutes ago. He was driving a stolen Honda Civic and was found with a substantial amount of cash and a mask consistent with the one in the surveillance image." Elias stared at the photo. Dennis Jones, the man police had been actually looking for. The man who committed the crime. "So, I'm free to go?" Elias asked, the question catching in his dry throat. Rodriguez placed her hands on the table and leaned in slightly. "You are. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Vance. We received a frantic 911 call from a civilian reporting a suspicious person matching the suspect description. Black male, dark clothes, in an older, large vehicle, parked directly across from St. Jude's, which they perceived as scoping out the church. They profiled me," Elias stated, the accusation flat and quiet. "They reported a description that was partially accurate," Rodriguez corrected, her gaze unwavering. "And given the severity of the robbery, we had to act quickly on the nearest possible match. We were wrong, and I apologize for the distress this has caused." The cuffs were removed. His wrists were red and raw. He walked out of the precinct into the cold pre-dawn air, collecting his jacket and phone. The keys to the Bronco felt heavy, no longer just keys, but symbols of a vehicle that made him a suspect. The worst part wasn't the hours in the room or the cold steel of the cuffs. The worst part was the way the world looked different afterward. Sophia was waiting for him outside the precinct. She ran to him, gripping him so tightly that he could barely breathe. She wasn't just relieved, she was traumatized. "I heard it on the news," she sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "A tall black man arrested near the cathedral. I knew. I just knew it was you. Over the next few weeks, the small wounds of that night festered. He couldn't park his Bronco anywhere without feeling the shadow of a spotlight. He stopped driving past the Union Street Credit Union. He began choosing routes home that avoided police cars, even if it meant taking 3 extra turns. He found himself dressing in brighter, lighter colors for work, unconsciously trying to make himself less dark and suspicious. The mugshot, even though it was taken illegally since he was never charged, haunted him. He knew it existed somewhere, a digital file, a database entry labeled Vance, Elias, suspect. He eventually filed a formal complaint. His lawyer explained the bleak reality. The police acted on a reasonable suspicion based on a 911 call and a vague description that happened to match his vehicle and race. They had the mugshot before evidence mindset, his lawyer summarized. They put you in a box first and check the evidence later. It's wrong, Elias, but in terms of legal liability for simple detention, it's a very high bar to cross. The city settled his case out of court for a nominal sum, a quiet admission of error that felt more like a payoff to shut him up than an apology. One evening, months later, Elias and Sophia were watching the local news. An anchor was discussing a new community safety initiative. Chief Harrison stated today that the Northwood Police Department is committed to using all available resources to keep residents safe, including rapid response and high-speed identification of potential threats. Elias muted the TV. He stood and walked to the kitchen window, staring at the darkened street. He was safe now. He was home. He was innocent. But the truth he carried was that innocence hadn't protected him. His skin color and his vehicle model had placed him in a temporary, terrifying category. The man police wanted, and only the inconvenient emergence of the actual criminal had returned him to his life. He turned back to Sophia. I don't just want them to apologize, Soph. I want them to see me. To see us. To stop seeing a list of features and start seeing a man who goes home to his wife, who drinks chamomile tea, and who just wants to fix a broken weather vane. Sophia walked over, her hands warm on his face. I see you, Elias. Always. But as he looked past her, into the dark reflection of his own living room, he knew the fear would never truly leave. Every siren he heard, every flash of blue light in his rearview mirror, was a cold reminder of the night he almost became a mugshot for a stranger's crime. It was the constant, silent price of driving while black in Northwood, a city where tragedy wasn't living in the streets, but lurking in the unexamined biases of those sworn to protect it.